Hello, I am pleased to welcome everyone to this international roundtable on India-Iran relations and contemporary Iran in a changing world, organized by Tillotoma Foundation. I am Soham Das, Director, Tillotoma Foundation. The keynote address at this international roundtable will be delivered by His Excellency Dr. Ali Chegeni, Ambassador of Iran to India. Following the keynote address, we will have the panel on Iran and changing global and regional order. This panel will be chaired by Ambassador Sanjay Singh, former Secretary East and Additional Secretary Gulf, Ministry of External Affairs India, and former Ambassador of India to Iran. After that, we will have the second panel of this international roundtable, the panel on India-Iran bilateral cooperation. This panel will be chaired by Dr. Wail Awad, Distinguished Advisor West Asia, Tillotoma Foundation. At this international roundtable, we will have eminent speakers, including diplomats, scholars, journalists, and analysts from both India and Iran. Myself and Dr. Meena Singh Roy, Head Western Central Asia Center, Tillotoma Foundation, are the conveners of this international roundtable on India-Iran relations and contemporary Iran in a changing world. The India-Iran partnership has great geopolitical, cultural, strategic, and geo-economic significance. I'm sure we will have an enriching experience at this event. Let me now request His Excellency Dr. Ali Chegeni, Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Iran to India, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. His Excellency Mr. Sanjay Singh, His Excellency Dr. Telmiz Ahmed, His Excellency Dr. Musavian, and distinguished speaker, Mr. Bani Asadi, Dr. Meena, Mr. Atwal Aneja, and all the dear participants and the friends that unfortunately I don't know the name and I don't see the pictures. It is a great honor and privilege to be here with you today and share my views on prospect of relations between two friendly nations. My special thanks goes to Tillotoma Foundation for organizing this webinar. Historically, no need to mention that historically, Iran and India as two great civilizations have shared social, political, and economic ties. And neighborhood continued until the partition in 1947. And still through the sea, we are the neighbors. More interestingly, until British colonization of India, the court language of India was also Persian. So even in Indian language, Persian language, Sanskrit, if we listen to each other very slowly, we can understand what is the matter and what is the subject. So post-colonial political, cultural, and economic ties between Iran and India always have been strong and brought remarkable achievements. I think because this is not based on the governments. The relationship between Iran and India based on the people sense and roots. So that's why we can say one of the most or closest country to each other is the two country of India and Iran, because based on the people relation. So emotionally, we are very close to each other, culturally, geographically, historically. So no need to mention, but sometimes we have to present this closeness and this connectivity and commonality that exists between the two countries for the new generations. So having Dr. Telmiz Ahmed here and Dr. Meena and some other participants, they know better than me, and they are very profound in this issue, how Iran and India relationship is strategic and should be cared, and this is a very heavy duty for soldiers like me to be in service of the both nations. Having said that, you might agree that Iran-India ties needs to be reset in such a way to be immunized against third-party factor in a world post-pandemic. Fortunately, we have been successful to continue our political, trade, and defense engagement, even reinforce it further during previous years. Amidst the constraints and defense ministers in result, just last year, we hosted Indian foreign minister and defense minister in a very short time and very close to each other. And even 2-3 months later, we have Iranian defense minister for the first time after 40 years. So that also is a very big and very critical and important promotion in the relationship. Recently, both countries, along with Uzbekistan, held their first trilateral meeting on use of Chabahar port as a transit hub for expanding connectivity between South and Central Asia, and hopefully we will have a quadrilateral meeting in New Delhi soon, including Iran, India, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan. Just for your information, some other countries also, they are very eager to participate, and that won't be very late, and very soon we will see some very important countries, they will join these 4 countries. As I referred last year, for the first time after the 40 years, my Minister of Defense, Brigadier General Amir Hatami, visited in India. He paid 3 days visit, very important negotiation with his counterpart and the Army Chief of India. So, looking forward, in my personal view, as reviving of JCPOA is looming, both countries can work on a roadmap for strategic energy partnership. Iran always has been a reliable source of energy for India and is offering affordability, accessibility, and security of energy to India. And even during the last time, very hard time of sanction against India, Iran never cut its relationship, even oil, against his friend country of India. There are multiple ways to expand the energy ties with Indian markets. The long-term supply agreement and a joint venture by a consortium of companies are possible options to ensure steady flows through a fair trade. Moreover, there is possibility to revive the India's plan to invest $20 billion in Chabahar economic free trade zone area. Not mean only in Chabahar itself, not in port only. In Chabahar free trade zone area, it is one of the biggest and very vast area, free trade zone area in southeast Iran. For setting up petrochemical or fertilizer plants, either independently or through joint ventures with Iranian public-private companies. In this regard, Iran has allocated the appropriate and adequate land in its economic free trade zone and willing to offer a favorable treatment in pricing of gas for India and also supply of rich gas at a competitive price and on a long-term basis for the life of the joint venture projects. Iran, in significant step toward development of its southeast coastal area, has worked on developing in Bandar Jask port project. This offers a relatively risk-free shipping transit route to Iran's key markets in the east, especially by India and China. In addition, Jask port will also be used to move crude oil feedstock feedstock supply to petrol refineries and petrochemical plants. With a view to increasing this export to Asia as well, having huge oil storage capacity available with just a short direct sea journey away from India means that it is time to realize construction of the Iran-India oil and gas pipeline, whether through land or sea. But the time is very short, and the opportunities won't remain forever because it is not in our hands. India also can use just port facilities to store its strategic crude oil reserve to meet emergency needs in case of disruptions in supply. In terms of trade ties, fortunately, Iran and India complement each other, as whether India needs can be supplied by Iran and vice versa. Given these advantages, the economic relations between the two countries passed $17 billion at its peak in 2018 and even had the capacity and prospect to reach 30 billion very fast. However, as you see, due to US sanctions, the trade volume has dropped to less than 5 billion. I do believe this trend in economic relations should be rectified, and we have to use every possibility way and drives to boost the relations and following negotiation on professional tariff agreement PTA, that five rounds of negotiation already done. It is in the last phase and that can be done very fast. Developing the new trade mechanism, rupee arrangement based on oil exports and buying the needs of Iran from Indian market, generalization of rupee arrangement to non-oil exports, direct barter trade, mutual legal assistance agreement in civil and commercial matters that already have been done and signed. It should be only signed through a ceremony. Issuing the necessary clearance for operation of Pasargad Bank. If Pasargad Bank will be open in Mumbai, that will be another hand beside Yoko Bank and IDBI to develop the trade between the two countries. And I think regarding the political issue, I don't want to enter because the time is limited. I'm sure the professors and scholars here, they will discuss very important issue of the regional matters of Afghanistan and security in Persian Gulf, and how we can work together in different area in our regional issues or international issues. As far as Iran and India were very good partner in diplomatic activity and having a lot of commonality in the position in international eras. So I don't want to consume the time, and it is good for me. Of course, it is an opportunity for me to take this advantage to use the professors and the scholars' views. And thank you for having me again and giving this opportunity to meet you and deliver my very short speech to you. And I hope you will correct me. And I'm sure all of you, you will give the new points and items how we can develop the relationship between the two great nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Ali Chegeni, Ambassador of Iran to India, for your keynote address. I must also thank the Embassy of Iran to India for all their support. Thank you so much. We have with us Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed. So I request him, if he can make a few introductory remarks at this stage.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I attach very great importance to our relationship with Iran and have frequently expressed disappointment at the slow pace of movement in regard to our bilateral relationship. I have uh, sounded the alarm bell frequently that if we do not show alacrity, Iran is a very significant player in regional affairs, and there are other countries that may move forward quickly to engage with Iran, and that will have significant geopolitical implications. The remarks of His Excellency are welcome. They show a very positive trend, and I am very pleased to hear them. But we have a long way to go. I think that the progress relating to Chabahar and the connection between Chabahar and Afghanistan and Central Asia has not been satisfactory at all. And I wish we had handled this with far greater enthusiasm than we have shown. If the thread can be picked up even at this late stage, I would welcome it very strongly, but I am skeptical because I have not seen the bureaucratic enthusiasm of the kind that it should have been with this strategically important project that was agreed to between India and Iran in 2003 when we were signing the strategic partnership agreement with Iran. I have also been a severe critic of India subordinating the relationship with Iran to our ties with the United States. I believe, given the stature that India has and the importance that India has in regional and world affairs, we should have been able to convince our American interlocutors that we should not be forced to choose between relationships. That the relationship with Iran is historical, it is civilizational, it is connected with our strategic interests. And this effort, I don't think, was made successfully, and I am dissatisfied about that. And as a result, on 2 or 3 crucial occasions, the relationship with Iran has plummeted very dramatically after the visit of President Khatami in 2003, when we talked about a strategic partnership and signed 15 or 18 agreements. Within 1 year, we had nothing to show. And we missed the opportunity on Chabahar at that time. I remind Indian Indian listeners that the agreement on Chabahar, development of Chabahar, and the connectivity from Chabahar in the region was 10 years before China came up with the Belt and Road Initiative. 10 years before. If we had shown movement on those strategically important projects, we would have had realities on the ground, and Belt and Road Initiative would have tried to adjust itself to us. We have nothing to show on the ground with regard to that opportunity, and now it is 17 years that that thing has happened. And look at the progress that Belt and Road is making all across the region, right from Xi'an to Tehran, from Tehran to Madrid, and from Madrid to come back and then go to Xi'an. They have been able to achieve this in 2 or 3 years. And in 17 years, we don't have a connectivity project. But we should not be pessimistic. There is a time when we can move forward. Opportunities come up. And I hope that the positive remarks that His Excellency the Ambassador has made, they herald a new era in our bilateral relationship, and it will have my full support as an academic in this regard. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say these few words to you.
Thank you very much. So let me request Mr. Atul Aneja, veteran journalist, to make a short introductory remarks.
Well, thank you very much for having me. So, it's hard to begin actually. There's so much about India and Iran, missed opportunities and potential opportunities. It becomes difficult where to start. But Dr. Ali Chegeni, the ambassador, has already sort of focused our minds on certain specific areas. So let me begin with that. And of course, Talmi's critique of missed opportunities, I completely accept. And it is with that spirit that we I wish to flag that we should not miss the new opportunity which seems to be coming our way, which the ambassador has just elaborated on. Coming specifically, I think the geopolitical scenario has changed to give us this new opportunity or a sense of opportunity. What the ambassador said about the JCPOA, I think that's going to come. And so the relationship between the Iranians and the West is going to change fundamentally. And that reduces the pressure on India to choose sides. I agree with Talmiz that we should, regardless of the Western pressure, take an position because independent of the West, we have a unique relationship with the Iranians. But it's a call of the government. And if it chose to do so under Western pressure, I think that pressure itself is going to reduce. So that, in a very narrow sense, increases an opportunity for a new phase of engagement between Iran and India. If that happens, then I think we got to relook at specific projects such as Chabahar. I'm heartened to hear that by the ambassador that there's a $20 billion opportunity in the free trade area in the Chabahar zone. I think this is the time to push for it as the pressures are going to be less on India, and then further move on to the connectivity projects further on, including the railways, and integrate the Chabahar project with the international north-south transport corridor, which makes a huge connectivity area. And I think that needs to be tied up with the projects the Russians have on the Eurasian Economic Union, which spread from Armenia, crossing into the heart of Eurasia and then ending into Vladivostok. So I think there's a massive opportunity, and Chabahar is just the starting point for a much bigger engagement. For me, Iran is not just India-Iran, but it's a gateway to Eurasia. And I and Talmiz have always argued on it. Is it the Asian century? I have said that it's not the Asian century, really. It is the Eurasian century, which is going to be the defining century of the 21st century. So I'm also surprised and elated, in fact, about the coming up of JUSC, Bandar-e-JUSC, which the ambassador has talked about. I'd be very curious to know about the pipeline opportunity which he has talked about. I mean, we have discussed, I don't know for how many decades, about the futility of the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline. And that's not going to work. We also had the Oman option at one time, which was basically from Iran to Oman and then undersea to Mumbai or on the western coast of India. So I'm very curious to know that what is this third option? Does it dovetail with the Oman option, or is it something new? But whatever be its details, I think the idea needs to be explored in depth. And the ambassador was saying that the window is short. Now the Chinese can, if we don't. So when the Iranians supposedly, I'm going by the New York Times report, that have signed some $400 billion deal with the Chinese, and Port of JUSC wasn't part of it. So I'm a little curious that when you say the window is opportunities closing on India, then who is taking that opportunity? But the idea needs to be done, because I have been arguing for a long time that despite all our historical and civilizational ties, we still do not have a strategic anchor. That is the India-Iran relationship. And energy is one area which can give us that strategic anchor. So very curious to know as to what are we getting this new opportunity, and how short is the window, or is it playing poker as well, because that is part of geopolitics, especially between two civilizational states. My final point is that Iran, being a civilization state, I think can play a major role in the emergence of a multipolar world, because come what may, come your forward or whatever else, the logic of geoeconomics is telling you that it is not a unipolar world, or there's even an attempt to create a unipolar world again under Biden or whoever is not going to work, because geoeconomics has changed. Both political power and economic power has been dispersed. And when you have a multipolar world, a civilization state like Iran, India, China, we got to play a role again. Unfortunately, the China-India relationship is going south and further south. Probably going to the Mariana Trench right now. But that's where I think Iran comes in with the relationship with China, with India, And I was curious when you said that there is certain opportunity for India and China. I think Iran is well positioned to start. I don't say mediation or anything, but a track two dialogue or track 1.5 dialogue as to see as to how the civilizational states can come together for the creation of a multipolar world. But frankly, whether we like or do not like China, China is going to be there, and it is not with any kind of having spent 5 years in China. I'm under no illusion of what the Chinese can do or what their intent, but the demand of reality and a situation which goes to India's advantage demands that there is some modus vivendi again created between India and China, and the end of that convergence should be a multipolar world with Russia, Iran, India, and I think with the coming changes in Israel as well, another new rider has come into the equation. I would say we are very close to age of convergence now. Things could have been better, but I think Iran can play a very major role now for the establishment or for spurring a multipolar world. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aneja. I think we have now come to the end of the keynote session, and it was a pleasure to have you, Your Excellency, and to hear from you, and also some introductory remarks. So at this stage, we will move to our first panel, the panel on Iran and changing global and regional order. This panel will be chaired by Ambassador Sanjay Singh, former Secretary East and Additional Secretary Gulf of the Ministry of External Affairs of India, and he's also the former Ambassador of India to Iran. We will have Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, former Indian Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates and Oman, and former Additional Secretary for International Cooperation in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Mr. Mohammad Hossein Bani Asadi, former Director of Indian Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Islamic Republic of Iran. Mr. Atul Aneja, Senior Journalist and Editor, India Narrative. Dr. Lakshmi Priya, Research Analyst, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. We will have Ambassador Syed Hossein Mousavian, former Ambassador of Iran to Germany and former Head Foreign Relations Committee of Iran's National Security Council. He is also the Middle East Security and Nuclear Policy Specialist at the Program on Science and Global Security of the Princeton University. So let me now hand over the session to Ambassador Sanjay Singh.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to chair the International Roundtable panel on Iran, Changing Global and Regional Order. Welcome to everybody who is there already on the panel. We hope our Iranian guests will be on soon. This event is most timely and will allow us to take a view of Iran's place against the seminal events taking place in the region and the world. Iran straddles Eurasia and the Persian Gulf, a rising Asia and the Western world. Its location at the strategic crossroads of regions and civilization gives it special import. Today, COVID and economic slowdown has deleterious effects on West Asia and the world. There's increasing global competition between the US and a rising China. Then the policies of the Biden administration, which has just taken charge, are a contrast from those of the Trump administration, with an increasing focus on the Indo-Pacific and China. Then the presidential elections in Iran this month. The future of the JCPOA is simultaneously being discussed in Vienna, and there are signs of hope. Important developments are taking place in the region itself, the Abraham Accords in Israel, Palestine, and the recent upsurge of violence, conflict in Syria, Yemen, an unsettled Iraq, and an unsettled Lebanon. Against this context, we have 5 eminent experts from both India and Iran in this panel. And each speaker is requested. Welcome, Ambassador Mousavian.
Good
Welcome
morning.
to the panel.
Good morning.
Yeah, it is a
Good
pleasure
morning.
to have you, Ambassador Mossavian. Thank you so
Thank
much.
We
you
are so
very much.
happy that
Good
you
morning.
could join at this unearthly early morning from the US.
Thank you.
Each speaker is requested to complete their initial remarks in 10 minutes. Time permitting, I will at the end invite any speaker who wishes to make brief concluding remarks. Good afternoon, my friend.
Yeah, hello, welcome, Mr. Mohammad Hussein Bani Asadi. Welcome. Thank you for joining.
Good to
Hello,
see you. Hello, good to see you.
good to see you, Ambassador, of a long time. Thank you.
Long time, a decade. Well, I was
Sorry.
saying I was welcoming everybody to this panel, and now everybody is there. We are very happy to have you all here. We will have at this panel, every speaker, I request you to confine your remarks to about 10 minutes. And in the end, I'll invite any speaker who wishes to make brief concluding remarks. I now invite Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed to make his remarks. He is a former Indian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman, a former additional secretary for international cooperation in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and a close friend and colleague of mine. Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, you have the floor.
We are getting together at this panel at a time of extraordinary uncertainty. Every time I attempted to assert a fact, I realized that many implications of that are not clear. Let us see, let us go through this list as quickly as possible. We are told that the Americans would like to retreat, particularly militarily, from West Asia. Whether this will actually happen, and if so, to what extent, and what its implications are, is not clear. Why is that? Well, every US president at the beginning of his term has said he doesn't want to be involved with the Middle East. And yet we have seen that very quickly the Middle East has the capacity to pull you in and enable you to be a seriously destructive role player in the region. I cannot for the life of me recall a single constructive role that the United States has played in West Asia over the last 40 years. But the region has had to live with it. I welcome with great enthusiasm such remarks, but I am skeptical. At the same time, we have seen the emergence of China and Russia. Jointly and severally, they have made major inroads in the region. Their initiatives have been diplomatic. They have had a political content, a defense content, an economic and energy content. And they have built up a network of relationships across Eurasia. What does this mean? Russia says that it wishes to be a major role player in world affairs. China is promoting robustly the Belt and Road Initiative. But China at the same time says it doesn't want to be too deeply involved with the security issues of West Asia. But if you want to see a successful Belt and Road, you have to be involved. Promote stability. China has initiated a peace plan for the region. We have to still see how far it will go and whether they want to work at it on their own or with partners. Therefore, we have yet to wait. Both of them, Russia and China, and separately Iran, have proposed a regional peace initiative. But it has so far been dismissed by the Americans without anything serious coming from Washington. Let us see which way it goes. But there is another interesting development that has happened. And I'm talking here about middle powers. India has obviously, because of its geographical location, been active in West Asian affairs. But now we hear noises coming from Japan and Korea that they also would like to enter the Indian Ocean and see what they can do in the region. I am, of course, skeptical about this. I asked a Japanese audience recently that if you are serious about crossing the Malacca, have you thought it through? What do you want to do there? what resources you can bring to the table, what kind of personnel you will deploy, and what is your strategic vision. And the same questions I put to Korea, because at an event recently, the Korean said he wants a blue water navy and get into the Indian Ocean. And I tried my best to cool down the enthusiasm. Middle powers, and I said to Japan and Korea gratuitously, please stay in the West Pacific and leave the Indian Ocean to regional players. One more aspect that we have to be all concerned about, we have no idea which way the global economy is going to go. Whether we will be able to put the pandemic back and recover quickly. And if we do, what is the content of that speedy recovery? Everyone talks loosely about technology. We do not know what implications this will have for energy demand. So, and for West Asia, that's a very crucial aspect about which we know very little. When we look at the region, we see, of course, a number of conflicts that have been ongoing for nearly a decade. Saudi Arabia and Iran manifesting their competitions in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. Turkey asserting its role in West Asia and competing doctrinally and politically with Saudi Arabia and with Egypt, and this competition manifesting itself in Libya. You also have UAE and Qatar having their own little skirmish in the waters of the Persian Gulf, and we don't know which way they want to go, whether they want to be larger than life players in the region or not. For example, UAE has been very active, extraordinarily active in the West Yemen coast and the southern Yemen coast, and all across the Horn of Africa. There is no area where they are not located in some shape or form, either through DP World building a port or an air base or what have you. They are in Somalia, Somaliland, Puntland, Eritrea, and they are all over the place. They are all over the place. And recently, a UAE person asked me whether India can work with the UAE in the West Indian Ocean. And I asked them, do you have a vision? What are you seeking in with the West Indian Ocean? What is your driver? Are you seeking to compete with Iran? Then we are not with you in any case, and I'm not sure you are serious about that. Are you serving any American interest? But that is not clear to me at all. So again, I am stumped by this uncertainty. And finally, there is Afghanistan. The Americans are desperate to go, and ironically, they have chosen September 11 as the date to declare their final defeat. September 11 brought them into Afghanistan, and September 11 is going to take them out of that country, leaving behind a trail of extraordinary destruction of the kind that is paralleled only in the case of Iraq. Where does all that, there is also these engagements that have taken place. How substantial they are? Do they have resilience? Will they have long-term implications? Saudi Arabia and Iran have engaged with each other in Baghdad. Turkey has had a high-profile meeting in Cairo at ministerial level. They also want to reach out to Saudi Arabia, though Saudi Arabia has pretended to, has indicated it's a reluctant partner in this regard. All of this happening, where does Iran fit in? As we look at Iran from India's perspective, we see a country under very severe pressure. The pressure of sanctions that has devastated their economic and social life, the cyber attacks that are constantly taking place, along with bombings and assassinations, and then, of course, this rise of young people in Iraq saying they do not want Iran or even the US or anyone else roaming around in their country. The presidential election has been, I would confess, a deep disappointment in the list of the candidates put together. What is the Guardian Council and the Supreme Leader seeking? This is a time when Iran could have shone. You could have had a very important slate with diverse people debating with each other. Look at the debate that has just taken place, the first debate. One of the most embarrassing encounters of senior Iranians, name-calling, abusing, threatening with violence. This is not credible. And then the Supreme Leader has said that he is not happy with the list. The Guardian Council said on 4th June that they are not happy with the list and they might revise it, but I am not sure which way they are going. So where does all this leave us? Is there going to be a nuclear agreement on the lines we had earlier? And what are the implications for sanctions? We do not know. What are the terms and conditions on which the United States will rejoin? What are the implications for the Iranian role in the region? There has been talk for so long about support for terrorism, about ballistic missiles, and what have you, and interference in the political affairs of the region. Can these be addressed in Vienna? Or is there going to be another platform where all this will come up? We have no idea as of now. Where do we go with Iran-US relations? This is an area which we can discuss for 40 years. We've been looking at it, and there has never been, at the same time, the two major countries agreeing to talk to each other seriously. This has not happened. Every time one has gone forward, the other has stepped back. So we do not know. This could be a good opportunity to seriously talk to each other, but we do not know. And then finally, if all goes down, what will be Iran's relationship with Russia and China? Will Iran be an integral part of this vision of Eurasia that both Russia and China are pushing forward? Will it intrude into Iran's own insistence on its autonomy, its strategic autonomy? We do not know. So as I conclude my remarks, I must confess that I have raised a number of issues, but I must say that I have no clarity on most of them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. I think you have raised a number of questions, and we will have the rest of the speakers also perhaps addressing them and new questions. I see Mr. Bani Asadi no longer there, but before I invite Ambassador Musavian to make his remarks, let me just say that before he came on to the panel, I just mentioned that I'll wait till, yes, there he is. I was saying that before you joined the panel, in my opening remarks, I had mentioned Iran straddles Eurasia and the Persian Gulf, a rising Asia and the Western world. Its location at the strategic crossroads of regions and civilizations gives it special import. I'd also mentioned that there is going to be Iranian presidential election. At the same time, in parallel, there seems to be good progress on the meetings in Vienna to dissociate the JCPOA. With this background, may I invite Ambassador Syed Hossein Musavian to make his remarks. I thanked him for doing so from the US at this early hour. He is the former ambassador of Iran to Germany and head Foreign Relations Committee of Iran's National Security Council. Middle East Security and Nuclear Policy Specialist, Program on Science and Global Security at Princeton University. Ambassador Musavian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good evening for those in India. Good morning. I don't know if you have any participant from United States, or good afternoon, anybody from Europe or other countries. As we all know, we have had 5 rounds of nuclear negotiations in Vienna after Biden's inauguration. Actually, JCPOA was negotiated already for 12 years, but implemented practically by US and EU, European, just for 1 year, 2016, although Iran fully implemented for 3 years from 2015 to 2018. However, JCPOA, during a very short period of its life, had faced with 4 major challenges. One practically was during President Obama. The implementation was faced with the problem of US primary sanctions before JCPOA, which was practically impeding the correct implementation of the deal. Second, during President Trump, we had maximum pressure policy. Trump reimposed nuclear-related sanctions, imposed new sanctions far beyond nuclear issue, and rebranded those sanctions lifted within JCPOA under the umbrella of terrorism, human rights, in order the other administration can never revive the deal. And the third challenge was practically the opposition by Bibi Netanyahu, John Bolton, Pompeo, MBS of Saudi Arabia, MBZ of United Emirates. I mean, there was a very powerful opposition front challenging the deal. And the fourth challenge was domestic pressures inside Iran against the deal. It was really powerful. We don't have time to go to explain every challenges. However, where we are now, Trump is gone. Maximum pressure policy is gone. John Bolton, Pompeo, they are gone. Biden is committed to revive the nuclear deal. Bibi Netanyahu hopefully is gone, but we don't know the successors policies. MBS has decided to engage with Iran. The nuclear negotiations in Baghdad has already started, and the hostile rhetorics have been relatively decreased. They have already agreed on Hajj ceremony, and I think they are going to continue the talks. And I'm optimistic there would be some type of compromise between Iran and Saudi Arabia. If so, MBZ of Emirates and Bahrainis, they would follow. And I think the current situation of nuclear talks after 5 rounds of talks, to my understanding, 90% of the issues have been agreed. And there are a lot of hopes the next round, which would be the 6th round, they would agree on the other 10%. But as Ambassador mentioned, we have the Iranian presidential election. Although I'm not encouraged with the disqualification, which Ambassador mentioned, but I have another understanding from Iranian domestic situation. I think if we can have a president, a government who is completely trusted by supreme leader, there would be much better situation for good decisions. And as of now, it seems that a principalist, a conservative, would win or would be the next president of Iran, which would be trusted by supreme leader and revolutionary guard. Therefore, if this assumption is correct, I am relatively sure that the next government would be fully committed to JCPOA. They would comply with JCPOA as the current Rouhani's government. But the advantage is that the JCPOA would not be challenged domestically anymore, because the opposition would be quiet against JCPOA, and JCPOA from the Iranian side domestically would not be challenged. And the next encouraging sign after the Iranian presidential election and after implementation of JCPOA, to me, is that the initiative of establishing a collective regional security and cooperation system in the Persian Gulf would have much better chance to be realized, because the new Iranian administration would have more power and would not be challenged domestically, as we were noticing during, we experienced during Rouhani or Khatami or Rafsanjani's period. Second, Biden administration would not block such a initiative. I understand Biden is advising Saudi Arabia to engage with Iran. And as I understand, they are positive about a possible regional arrangement. Already we have EU, they are positive, India is positive, Russia is positive, China is positive. And the United Nations Secretary General is very supportive. From the regional countries in the region, 4 countries, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Iraq, already they are supporting. Therefore, if we have a breakthrough on 2 issues, one JCPOA, which would open the door for further dialogue and cooperation between Iran and the regional countries, Iran and the world powers. And the second breakthrough would be between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which I'm optimistic that there would be some compromise after election with the new government. The current negotiations, practically, the Revolutionary Guard, the security establishments, the military, they have a very heavyweight presence. And that's why this would be sustainable progress. Therefore, to my understanding, although there are some disappointments about this qualification, but if we have a president in Iran which is fully supported and trusted by the leader, because practically the leader has the main power on foreign policy and national security issues to decide and to agree or to reject. And if the other powers like Revolutionary Guard, which practically they are a very powerful establishment in Iran, if they are supportive of the president, then we would have a situation that the decisions would be, first of all, coordinated much better. It would not be challenged domestically by the opposition. And in implementation, we would have much more soft and better implementation of the decisions. Therefore, if the US and the P5+1 would implement JCPOA correctly, because I'm personally optimistic there would be an agreement on JCPOA in Vienna within next 2-3 weeks. But the problem is whether the EU and US would implement the JCPOA precisely, completely, correctly or not, as we experienced before. If yes, then we would have a chance for much better chance for resolving regional issues through regional cooperation systems supported by United Nations Security Council and many regional countries. Ambassador, I try to stop, not to exceed much more than 10 minutes. You gave me time.
Thank you very much for being very disciplined, and thank you very much for injecting much optimism into our proceedings. I truly like the views that you have projected, and hopefully they will come true. Now, may I invite Mr. Atul Aneja to make his remarks. He's a senior journalist and veteran foreign correspondent and editor, India Narrative. And I first came to know him when he came to cover the elections in 2009 to Tehran. Welcome, Atul. May I invite you to make your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sanjay Singh. I fondly remember the time. I think was just probably Ahmadinejad got elected around that time. No, 2009 was later when we had yes, that's exactly the point. Ahmadinejad's election, and only person, and I can declassify today, who told me that he could be the winner out of all the candidate list was a friend, Mr. Bania Sadi. He was the only voice I heard who warned me that don't get carried away with what you read in Tehran Times or in Iran News and other newspapers. Well, I just take off from where Ambassador Mousavian left, and I completely agree with his optimism about, I think we are entering into an age of convergence over here. And he talked about the JCPOA. Looking at, in a strategic sense, it seems to me an inevitability. The question is, how do you finish it? How much time will you take it? And what would be the inner deals which would give and take, which will take place? But I think having gone through an experience once, it should not be very difficult. I am a little surprised that he's saying that we may have something in 2 to 3 weeks in Vienna. So if that's the case, then it's happening very soon. And that opens the door for, I mean, it's a complete game changer once that happens. And from the Indian perspective, it opens plenty of new opportunities which take place. I also agree with him that the Iran and Saudi dialogue is taking place, which is going to have huge repercussions downstream throughout the region, and in a positive sense. And adding to that, I was following the Israeli elections very closely, as all of you were. And it's not a question of how fragile a new government probably is emerging. But the complete change in mindset, it's the mentality of trying to have Israel, which Netanyahu is not an individual. He represents a mindset. And I noticed this even way back in 2013 when I visited Tel Aviv, that the young people of Israel were wanting change, and there were protests which were taking place in squares inside Israel against the security-oriented policies. There was a lot of opposition to the wall at that time itself. So I think that's coming. That's a dynamic which was there brewing for a long time, and it seems to be getting translated politically now. And if you're going to have a more tolerant or a more moderate Israel coming up, now that's going to change the equations in the region, in Lebanon with the Hezbollah, and then in Iraq and Syria. So it's again, I think, an event which we need to add to the two others, that is JCPOA and the rapprochement, or the budding rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So, and the third point, again, I'm in agreement with him about the Iran elections, because frankly, if you're going to have a president who is aligned with the supreme leader, and that's where the real power is, then probably we're entering a phase of stability rather than anything else. So, come to think of it, both geopolitically and geoeconomically, there's a fundamental change taking place in the region. And what does that mean for India? And I think there's a huge opportunity out there. The first thing, of course, is what we spoke initially before Sanjay, you joined us, which was the Chabahar port opportunity. That the route is not only a gateway to Afghanistan, but as we know, it's the gateway to Central Asia and then further towards Europe. But what is most heartening is the possibility, because the Western pressure is going to be much less on India than it was before, to expand it at a very rapid pace. And Ambassador Ali Chegeni, just before in his keynote address, mentioned that there's a $20 billion opportunity in the free trade area around Chabahar. I think that's massive. The second thing is that from the Indian point of view as well, we have talked about the integration of the Chabahar route and the international north-south corridor, that is from Bandar Abbas northwards to Bandar Anzali, Astrakhan, and then you go further into Russia. And then you get hooked onto the Russian connectivity network, which extends right up to Armenia on one side, and then moving eastwards toward Vladivostok. So these are huge opportunities which open out, and I think these can go a long way in the emergence of Eurasia coming into its own, and India being a very active part of the rise of Eurasia. There is also the energy situation which comes into play. And I've said this before, even in this forum itself, that India and Iran still do not have an anchor to their relationship. We have talked about the Iran-Pakistan-India gas pipeline. That is unrealistic, because I don't see India-Pakistan relationship, and Mr. Baniasadi was in Lahore, he'll probably know even better than me, that I don't see this really going any way forward. So whatever route of energy access one has to have from Iran, that has to bypass Pakistan. And we had talked about the Oman route earlier, that from the Aswalia area, which is basically the gas area of Iran, from there move on towards Oman and then undersea from Oman to the west coast of India. So that was one route which was talked about earlier. And Ambassador Chegeni had mentioned that there is probably another opportunity from Jask of another pipeline coming towards India. We don't know the details yet, but I do believe that energy offers a real opportunity for India and Iran to anchor that relationship, structurally integrate that relationship, and give it a solidity which will prevail despite whatever be the changes in the political circumstances in either of the two countries. So that structural linkage is still missing. But I do believe that with the better the geopolitical situation changing post JCPOA, I think these are areas which will be discussed. As we know, the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline was vehemently opposed by the Americans. So we don't know. With the change in the political environment, we have this new idea of really building on the energy relationship, much more than just a buyer-seller relationship, which just buys oil from Iran through ships. But a pipeline would be a great idea. Would really want to talk to Iranians and others who are energy experts whether this would be still a realistic option. And I think the third major area, which is probably independent of the geopolitical changes which we are talking about, is really the civilizational relationship which needs to come of its own in the digital age. I mean, we talk of very strong Indian civilizational and Persian civilizational ties, but how do you actually bring it together under a new ideological framework, which I think is very much required for it to get traction? And I've been talking with the Russians, and you know, Alexander Dugin, one of the advisors to President Putin. I mean, we had a conversation when I was in China, and he said it is inevitable that we build on what Huntington said. You know, Huntington in his Clash of Civilization once talks about the clash, but he really was talking about that if the world has to come into its own, it has to be a multipolar world. And Dugin's thesis actually built on Huntington's thesis. And he's arguing that for a multipolar world to emerge, we have to have the bonding of civilizational states. And in his view, you have to have the Persian civilization, the Indian, the Chinese, and of course the Russians come into the picture as well, Christian Orthodox, and one more. And he says this is to be an alliance of civilizations. Only then we will have a multipolar world. And I think in this particular context, it's a topic of a separate debate. But I do believe that there is another track of India and Iran which is underexplored, which is of how do we leverage our civilizational ties into a modern era in the building up or the raising of a multipolar world. Because economics has changed, as Salmi was mentioning, that it's got diversified. Whatever made the Americans try, this is not the Berlin Wall moment. You know, you will never be able to recreate a unipolar world. It was a short experiment which failed. Whatever Fukuyama and others might say, but that's passive, that's gone. And the new world has not emerged. So I do believe that this is an area which India and Iran need to engage. And frankly, the Chinese have to come into the picture. The India-China relationship probably says nothing right now. But somewhere down the line, there is a need, and I think the Iranians should play a very strong role here to start at least an academic dialogue, a track to dialogue, which will include the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Indians. I think that, and you got to ideate on the multipolar world idea, to flesh it out and give it a concrete shape and ideas which are politically implementable. I think I've said enough. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I wonder whether Mr. Bani Asadi is still connected. Mr. Bani Asadi? Well, by the time he gets back onto the panel, may I at that time invite our young friend, Dr. Lakshmi Priya, to make her remarks. She is a research analyst at the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. She is working in the West Asia program there. And before I invite her to make her program, I must mention to Atul, thank you very much for your very interesting remarks. I will also just add one more point to your anchor theory, that people are a major anchor. If I may excuse myself, Lakshmi, may I request you to go last, and may I have Mr. Muhammad Hussain Bani Asadi to make his remarks. He is consul. He was Consul General of Iran and a former Director of Indian Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iran, and I remember a very warm interactions when I was there in Tehran. Mr. Bani Asadi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry that I could not hear due to poor connection. Naturally, I do not know what speakers talked about. I want to raise some points regarding bilateral relation, Iran-India bilateral relations. Fortunately, history has a good support for our relations. In the past centuries, we had a good interaction, and always Iranian had good memory of India. Whenever elites of two nations have cooperated, they reach to a very good conclusion. Suppose I give an example. During Mughal era, Iranian elites with India created a new style known as Hindi style in literature, which is very much famous in literature. Then Parsis naturally had very good participation in development of India. Original Parsis, when they migrated to India. Public opinion of Iran is very positive regarding India. I believe relations, bilateral relations, is based on two elements. I want to divide them: permanent elements and non-permanent elements. Permanent elements, suppose Iran is neighbor of Pakistan, of India. According to instruction of Chanakya, famous Chanakya, neighbor is very much important. Iran is center of Shiism in the world. India has also a good population of Shia in the world. Iran, geographically as geopolitically, is very important for India and can connect India to other parts of the world, especially Central Asia. Iran and India are extended neighbor, especially in sea. Now, non-permanent elements. To import crude oil from Iran for many years, many decades even. Trade, bilateral trade, we had very good trade. Cultural interactions, political interactions, to balance relations with regional countries sometimes, of course, and impact of regional and international environment on relations also we had. Permanent elements fortunately worked well and now still are base of the relations. But non-permanent have proved their vulnerability and sometimes even showed their face in a negative way. Just I want to give you when in war against Iran in IAEA and sector stopping import of petroleum from Iran last year. Really, we could not explain Iran why India such action. Because public opinion, as I said, they expect to have good memory after stopping from series to minus $1 billion. Now, I believe we have to try to attention more to non-elements and to trade also. And export of just few commodities, mainly rice from India and crude oil and petrochemical compound from Iran. we have to go for investment, joint venture, transfer of technology, not only in Iran and India, but maybe in some other parts of the world also, to go for a deep economical cooperation and good trade. Regarding transportation, it is about 2 decades that we talk about South-North corridor. But unfortunately, it is not utilized well. Still, a small portion of India's transport going via South-North, North-South corridor. Chabahar is very important port for both countries, but unfortunately, it is in the ground. It is not so much paid attention, except IPGL, that is an operator of India in Chabahar. There is no any investment, any presence of Indian, businessman. 2 years ago, when I was in Chabahar, many Indian private sector businessmen registered for activities in Chabahar free area zone. But unfortunately, even one single Indian businessman we could not find over there. We were surprised. I believe we have to pay more attention to Chabahar. We have to encourage businessmen from India and Central Asia all to come to Chabahar. And another factor, we should not allow a third factor be a country or suppose something like GCPOA. We should not allow them to have a negative impact on our bilateral relations. We have to stop them. Regional and international environment also sometimes affects our relation. We should stop it. Rivalry, destructive rivalry, we have to stop if there is. Sometimes in someone may talk about it and convert it into cooperation. Iran has a good relation with China and Pakistan, frankly. India has a good relation with United States and Israel. We should not allow any third factor to impact our relations. Okay, we have relations with them. But with China, we have a treaty of cooperation for 25 years. But it doesn't mean that it is at the cost of India relation. With Pakistan also, we have good relation. With India in 2003, I remember we have signed a declaration of a strategic partnership, and we are ready also to have long-term cooperation with India also, as with China. Now here I want to propose to my colleagues in Tillotoma Foundation not to have more roundtable and seminars, not only Iran, India, but also 3 areas we have here which are important for India and Iran: South Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, and Persian Gulf area. I believe we have to work regionally. These 3 areas we can bring together, and because our interest, our national interest, our security interest is in cooperation with and peace and stability in the region. For the time being, suppose Iran and India consultation, even since last centuries, mainly Afghanistan, to extend it in to three which I mentioned. There are also good office to ability to create countries of and with these three regions on India.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bani Asadi. Thank you very much for pointing out the strong foundations of India-Iran relationship and for your optimism about the prospects of the future. Your talk was also a kind of a metaphor for the present, given the vagaries of the internet nowadays. Thank you for your patience, Lakshmi. May I now invite the last eminent speaker to make her very important remarks at this panel.
Thank you,
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tillotoma Foundation, to give me an opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. Let me begin by saying that Iran has proved time and again that it is a major regional power. You can like it or dislike it, but cannot ignore it. Having said that, it is also apparent that Iran's regional position is defined by a set of challenges that got aggravated during the presidency of Donald Trump in the United States of America. To begin with, Trump's accusation of Iran for attack on Gulf Oman tankers and US State Department's designation of IRGC as a terrorist organization affected Iran's regional perception. However, the reversal of JCPOA in 2018 thwarted the calculations of the global community as well as Tehran regarding the resolution of the Iranian nuclear issue. Nevertheless, Biden administration's coming to power in Washington and its positive posturing regarding the JCPOA provides Iran an opportunity to tilt the calculations in its favor. Optimism regarding the ongoing talks in Vienna about reviving the JCPOA is not unfounded. In case the deal is reinstated, Iran can fathom to move ahead in the regional and global geopolitical dynamics. The next round of talks to take place on June 10th might hold clue to the near future for Iran. The second important development has the potential to change the regional dynamics for Iran is Abraham Accords, signed by the UAE and Bahrain with Israel. The accords can bring Arab Gulf countries and Israel closer, and they may come together as a combined force to contain Iran. Further, Iran will have to take into consideration that post-accords arms deal between the USA and the Arab countries has the potential to provide impetus to the arms race in the region. UAE and other Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar are vying to buy F-35 Lightning II from US. It is the world's most advanced multi-role warplane manufactured by an American company, Lockheed Martin. Now, UAE also intends to buy MQ-9 Reaper drones from Washington. So it goes without saying that acquisition of advanced weapons by the Arab countries can lead to arms race in the region. Further, a more dangerous trend could be the regional procurement of arms by the Arab countries. As the relations between Israel and its Accord partners warms up, the Arab countries would not shy from importing arms from Israel. Currently, Turkey and UAE are major regional arms suppliers for the Arab countries. Oman is Turkey's largest arms importer, constituting 19% of its total export, while Egypt, Jordan, and Algeria are top 3 import partners of UAE. They collectively constitute more than 2/3, or to be more precise, 69% of its total arms export. In such a scenario, Iran will be bound to increase its arms acquisition and production capacity. It is also to be noted that though Iran's military and strategic alliance with Russia is as strong as ever, Moscow will have to make tough decisions regarding the changing regional geopolitical dynamics. Russia is gradually strengthening its foothold in the region. Vouching for multipolarity, Moscow is supporting the Bashar al-Assad government in Syria and has been proactive in fight against terrorism. It is militarily engaged in Syria as well as Libya. Emphasizing on pragmatism, it has improved its ties with the Arab Gulf countries, Turkey, as well as Israel. However, Moscow's comeback in the Middle East arms market ties its geopolitical moves to its defense economic benefits, and it is difficult, if not impossible, to look at it in a compartmentalized fashion. Almost a decade ago in 2012, Putin had said that Russia sees active military cooperation as an effective instrument for advancing political and economic national interests. Therefore, even if Moscow is an important ally for Iran and will be willing to stand by, it will be bound by economic constraints. In this regard, Iran's willingness to mend ties with Saudi Arabia is significant. One can hope for generation of a positive dynamo effect post Iran-Saudi talks in Baghdad. Nevertheless, Iran has been able to downplay the intentions of its regional adversaries in the past. However, it has had to pay the price in form of domestic economic and political challenges. For instance, Iran stood beside Bashar al-Assad's government in Syria when majority of the Arab countries rooted for its downfall. It supported its major Arab ally Syria with military, technical as well as financial resources. Through this, Tehran demonstrated its willingness to stand by a friendly regional country while securing its strategic interest of emerging as a middle-range regional power. Simply put, Iran can look to diversify its partners' support base. Among the international players, Russia and China are Iran's strong partners, but Tehran has to be cautious not to be seen as client state of either of these. This brings us to the historic and time-tested India-Iran ties. Despite exogenous factors impacting the relations between the two are in a good shape. There are challenges concerning energy trade. However, the issue can be resolved diplomatically. The cooperation on Chabahar port will be beneficial not only for Afghanistan and Central Asia, but also for the geopolitics of the region. It is also to be noted that New Delhi and Tehran have been strengthening security and strategy-related ties, as was evident from the recent visit of Indian Defense Minister to Iran and Iranian Defense Minister's visit to India. The two countries share smooth and friendly multi-dimensional ties, and nonetheless, there are opportunities to expand the ties further. And I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi, for your wide panorama of very interesting points and your general optimism about India-Iran relations. I must thank the panel for what I could get out of what the panel has been saying over the last 1 hour is they've exuded a little optimism about the talks in Vienna on the JCPOA. They've also exuded optimism about there being regional ententes in due course, the most important being between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They've also shown optimism about India-Iran relations for a variety of reasons, despite the difficulty that they may be inherent in that. May I now invite everybody in the panel, one by one, those who wish to make their concluding remarks. May I request, first of all, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad, in the same order in which you spoke, to make your concluding remark.
Thank you. I agree with Atul that this is the era of convergence. And I share the optimism in my good moments. But I thought I would very quickly highlight some of the problems that we face. because the threat to the region has not gone away. The first is the United States itself. It's a very complicated political order with extremely powerful elements at home, particularly reflective of the right wing, which are viscerally hostile to Iran and would resist every attempt to engage with Iran constructively. And they will use every effort that they can, particularly through the media and through their think tanks, to sustain this hostility. The sections within Iran, within the US, that are supportive of engagement are limited, and they are few. I'm not saying they are useless, but they are very limited. The hostile elements are very substantial. The second lobby that will work very hard against peace and stability in West Asia is the weapons lobby. If we just lean back and see how much the weapons lobby in the United States has benefited from this construction, from this confrontation, and you will see that some of these confrontations have in fact been engineered from within the US establishment for reasons that are difficult to fathom. I mean, yes, they did carry out this massive assault upon Afghanistan after 9/11, but then they carried it on with Iraq and sustained an occupation up to now, for very many years. An occupation force has remained there. And when there were indications that presidents don't want to engage in military adventures, look at the massive weaponry that has been sold to the GCC countries. So this weapons lobby is going to be a significant role player to come in the way. The third is Israel. I agree that this, what we are looking at, has the promise of hope. That yes, you could see an Israel that finally starts reflecting the views and concerns of its next generation. But yes, you have very powerful religious elements. They're only 13% in the country, but they exercise extraordinary authority. And then you have the settlers lobby, and you have with them large sections of the security establishment. They too see the Iranians with visceral animosity. So I think that it is important to note which way the winds will blow. There are elements, there are ill winds that also are blowing across the region, and they could harm the region's long-term interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. In all your remarks, I could discern the hidden aspect of the Iranian role, which will continue to remain important in this region. And to delineate on it further, may I now invite Ambassador Mousavian to make his concluding remarks. Ambassador Mousavian.
Thank you, Ambassador. My first remark is about, Yes, my first remark is about Iran-India relations. I believe this relation is a coin with two-sided. One side is the fact that if you compare Iranian commonalities and common interests with any power worldwide, I believe Iran and India, they have the most commonalities and most common interests compared to US, Europe, Russia, China, Japan, or any other world powers. This is one side. But the other side is that the fact Iranians, they need to take to consideration that the Indians, they cannot sacrifice their national interest. And if they are supposed to choose between Iran and the US, they would choose US. Because they have much more important interest in relation with the United States of America compared to Iran. Therefore, as long as the tensions between Iran and the West, Iran and the US continues, I believe India would not be able to establish a strategic, comprehensive relation with Iran. This is number one. Number two, the reason I'm optimistic about JCPOA, because the world powers, none of the world powers, they would like to see a nuclear Iran. And they see no other option. since the JCPOA is the most comprehensive agreement during the history of non-proliferation, far beyond NPT. The transparency measures, the limits within the JCPOA is far beyond NPT. And they understand after 12 years of negotiations, they have reached to a most comprehensive agreement with the most intrusive inspections, which definitely would guarantee non-diversion toward weaponization, and there is no other option. This is number two. That's why I'm optimistic about the talks in Vienna. Biden has been a part of JCPOA before Trump, and the team is exactly almost the same team, and they would do everything to be realistic to revive the nuclear deal. And the other world powers, even the regional powers, they understand this is the best option. Number third is about the region. And I believe Iran, always I have said, this is a reality, Iran is a major regional player. But we need to understand Iran is not the only player. We have Arabs. It is not only Saudi Arabia. And if we compare Indian economic relation with a very small Arab country, UAE, with 1 million native, the Indian economic relation is more with UAE is more than Iran with 90 million population. Therefore, this is the realities. I mean, these are the facts. Turkey is a major power. Israelis, they have been able to play a role definitely in this region. As far as the current trend, the past decades trend is going to continue, we would never have a stable region as we have never noticed. I mean, the Middle East is a region with the most crises, unfortunately, from terrorism to sectarian war, to failed states, to civil war. Whatever crisis, you can find it in the Middle East. We are not going to, the world powers, they have proved they have not been able to manage Israeli-Palestinian crisis after 70 years. And that's why I'm not optimistic, because of Israelis' unilateralism and ambitious. But there is a possibility for the other part of the Middle East, Iranians and Arabs in the Persian Gulf. I believe there is a good opportunity for establishing a regional security and cooperation system. India can play a big role here, because this is a big common interest between Iran and India. And every regional issues, if we want a region free from nuclear weapon, you can bring nuclear weapon free zone within the system of Persian security cooperation, Persian Gulf security cooperation. If you want a WMD free zone in the region, if you cannot convince Israelis, at least we can have a sub-regional system in the Persian Gulf, WMD free zone in the Persian Gulf. We can include terrorism, drug trafficking, organized crime, and convert the confrontational status quo, Iran, Saudi, Iran, some Arab countries, to cooperation. And this is the only option. I believe this is the time for India and for other world powers to play a role. And at the end, I think Saudis, they would convince, because they have experienced confrontational strategy. They failed in Iraq, they failed in Yemen, they failed in Lebanon, and they have experienced many, many failures. Now even is the time for Saudi to think.
Thank you, Ambassador Mousavian, for laying out the hope, and if I may say hope by pun on the word hope. It is a very important initiative, and I hope such initiatives will come to fruition. May I now invite Mr. Atul Aneja to make his concluding remarks.
Ambassador Singh, I agree with what Dharmesh is saying, that nothing is, we have not reached a stage when something is irreversible. We are talking about broad trends which are taking place. Now, whether these trends will fructify finally into something concrete and positive, we don't know. But after about possibly a decade, we see that the wheels are moving again. And there is a new situation which is emerging. And now how we make use of the new opportunities is up to us. But there's a room which has been created now with the coming up of JCPOA, which will be major. The relationship between Saudis and the Iranians. You know, the war weariness which is sitting in after this war in Yemen, what happened in Lebanon, what Ambassador Mousavian was talking about. So the minds are shifting at this time towards convergence. And whether it's a irreversible process, who knows? I agree with the Talmiz when he says that you have this weapons lobby as a very powerful institution which is against any kind of peace emerging. But if I really look at the big picture, the weapons lobby is really concentrating on the broader confrontation between the United States and China. That's the confrontation which is going to absorb the weapons, in that many quantities. I think that is the bigger dynamic where the weapons lobby is going to focus upon, rather than the region of the Middle East. So it's more sort of, there's a change in the overall dynamic, which will probably make it less hostile. And I'm being optimistic here to a peace breakout in West Asia. I want to make one final point, which is that despite all our way of looking at things in terms of hobbies, etc., I think we have come as a society, as a global society, to a point of reflection. There's a new generation millennials and Z. They don't think differently like us, frankly. For them, it's a global village. Religion doesn't matter. A new set of value systems is coming in, which wants something. It is it wants to demolish the old order, and you see that in Black Lives Matter and the young people in the United States. Frankly, even in the Arab Spring, we saw of shades of that. So we have to be watchful of that undercurrent, which is there in most of the countries with young populations. That despite all the earlier formulations which we have, that it probably is going to smash all that in a while. So, the way we look at it in terms of weapons lobbies, IPAC, Israeli lobby, I think there is a very major globalization of society, and this is driven by these climate activists and this younger generation, the digitally savvy people, which don't recognize national boundaries and, in fact, national sovereignty. So it is this powerful undercurrent, which I think can be a cause of hope or destruction, we don't know, but which definitely is agency for change. And probably we have to factor that in any kind of analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Atul. Thank you very much showing your optimism about the new generation. And I think it's not misplaced given that humankind is on the verge of colonizing the moon, maybe Mars, and the further planets beyond. And in this kind of environment, obviously, human conflicts will perhaps be seen as futile. May I now invite Mr. Bani Asadi to make his concluding remarks.
Hear well and fully the speakers. I do not know whether you have heard me or not.
Well, we heard most of it, and we also realized from your exposition that we have entered a new era where we will converse over this very, very unreliable medium called the internet.
I believe trade, politically, culturally, okay, Iran and Iran, everyone knows, but our Achilles heel is trade. We have to diversify trade, and we have to deepen trade, especially go for investment joint venture in big areas as oil, gas, transport. A relation, a big economic relation is not a healthy relation, I believe. That's why we have to go for strengthening trade, and trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Lakshmi, the floor is yours to conclude the whole proceedings.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I would like to conclude by 2 points. One is I feel that after the Abraham Accords, the establishment of regional security structure becomes more important. Maybe like Hormuz peace endeavor or something like that, because we know that Iran is not very willing to have outside players a role in the regional security structure, whereas Arab countries would want that. But maybe they could come to a middle ground for that. So importance of regional security structure is becomes highlighted after these accords. And the second point is we might also see an increased impetus to Iran-China ties after the thing. And Iran-China deal is a case in point. Yeah, I would like to conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi. Thank you to the panel for throwing up a number of very interesting and wide-ranging thoughts and ideas. I hope our audience found them of interest, and I hope our audience would reflect on many of these ideas and points and benefit from them. All that remains for me now is to thank this distinguished panel, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad, Ambassador Musavian, Mr. Bani Asadi, Mr. Atul Aneja, and Dr. Lakshmi Priya for sparing their valuable time. And I must thank Tillotoma Foundation for giving us this opportunity to talk to a wider audience on this very important topic of Iran's place in the regional and the global order and how this will come about in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Singh. Thank you so much, and thanks to all the panelists. We now conclude this part of the discussion, and we will reconvene at 7 p.m. Indian time. Thank you so much.